5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off!
I'm terrible at pimping my stuff, so I thought dressing like a pimp might make it a little bit easier. I have blogs where you can read stuff and see things and interact with me. My main one is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. My writing one and sort of diary blog is over at talesofgrim.wordpress.com. Hope to see you there. This is a review of Maschine Zeit by Machine Age Productions. Maschine Zeit meaning the same thing. It's from about 2008. So it might be a little unfair in some of the judgments that I make about the book because, you know, it's 10 years old at this point. And it's also by some people that I haven't really gotten on with, shall we say. David Hill, who is now Olivia Hill, and I know deadnaming, but this goes back to then and encounters with them at the time. Filamina Young, their partner. It also involves some other names that you might recognise. Chuck Wendig, for example, who used to seem okay, but then turned out to be a bully, just a bully against the right targets, I suppose. Eddie Webb, who I used to know back from Camarilla days, he's, so far as I know, not a dick. How he ended up mixed up with these people, I don't know exactly. So why would I buy this from people that I don't get on with, and at a cost of about $40 US, no less, for a mere 138 pages? At the time was my first sort of run-in with Hill and with some of the others around them, like Tracy Hurley and so on. I was trying to understand where they were coming from. They were kind of like at least for me, they were the vanguard of the woke scold push into tabletop gaming. And I couldn't understand where they were coming from. I was trying to have discussions with them, and I thought it would be lovely and fluffy and nice of me to buy a few things of theirs, to try and read those to get a handle on what they were about. By the time the book actually arrived, it was too late. I'd tried, I'd courted them, I'd gotten them to write a few things for me. Tracy Hurley wrote a couple of adventure modules for me. I tried to have the discussion with them in my usual pretty reasonable sort of way. They weren't having it. So I'm biased against the company and the people involved, and they are horrendous dicks, but at the time I was trying to understand them. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from with this. Now, this is supposed to be basically for ghost stories in space. Now, Alien was described that way. A few other things like Solaris and so on have perhaps been described that way. But if you were trying to reproduce Alien or Dead Space, which it also seems to take quite a lot of inspiration from, this isn't really the game for that. Those are much more visceral, and this is very much a story type system, and it's a story type system laid out in a fairly confused and confusing manner. It invokes an awful lot of woo in a way that the more sort of Lovecraftian or splatterpunk tradition doesn't. Lovecraft is weird, but it's things man cannot comprehend, cannot understand, cannot know. This is much more pedestrian supernaturalism, and throw in some unbelievium. It's set in a fairly grim future where a lot of people took to space stations and platforms, more accurately beanstalks, space elevators with platforms tethered to them, and then a whole bunch of disasters struck. Reading through the background, with the benefit of hindsight and how things have gone since, you can sort of see and understand the sort of seeds of the problems that we're seeing from these people. It's India that first opens up one of these space stations, these platforms. The first US one goes wrong and crashes into the ground and causes all kinds of problems. It's all fairly grim and predictable, fairly pedestrian, as I said. But what's different is the far edge of a gamma ray burst hits Earth and scrambles these stations and kills a whole bunch of people on them, sends others crashing to Earth, and so on. And then the basic premise is that you're either recovery engineers, salvage engineers, members of churches looking for information on the deceased, which is a thing they talk about, exploiters, capitalists looking to resettle these platforms and so on, that sort of thing. So you're some sort of salvage crew with some kind of reason to get on board, and then that's where weird things begin to happen. But the weird things are not in that harder science, Lovecraftian, things man was not meant to know, non-supernatural tradition. It's not the sort of existential terror, it's woo horror, which still, to me, would need a more visceral system for horror to really work. The premise is fine, it could work pretty well with its own system, but not so much this, particularly when they mention a lot of these things as inspirations. So the system is really an issue. It's very wibbly wobbly. They've redefined a whole bunch of terms. The book and its background are interminably lost in purple prose and bad fiction, in the way that White Wolf games were at their worst, at their absolute worst, or particularly in sort of Aberrant Trinity, those sorts of games. So much of the meta plot and what was actually going on and ideas and inspirations and so on were lost in text, which was all by unreliable narrators. This is very much the case here. So it's very hard to get a handle beyond the very basics on what the hell this game is supposed to be about, particularly. Or, what's real, what's true, what is and what isn't. Things that a games master needs to know, even if the players don't need to know. You should have an idea of the world, at least as a good hook in that salvage. You've got a reason to visit these stations and get this information. Character creation is sort of a concept, and who's paying for you to go on these trips to these space stations. Ideas about how the group might hang together. There's dynamics and backgrounds and things they call elements. Some of these are core, some of these are stuff you can make up. It's all very wishy-washy and wibbly-wobbly, really. While also being somewhat technical. The system uses a D10 for resolution, but it's conflict-averse resolution, which is kind of a good thing for horror, but it's not what I mean here. It's not conflict-averse because it's difficult and dangerous. It's conflict-averse because, again, it's a wibbly-wobbly sort of set conditions metagame way of resolving conflict that doesn't put you in the moment, doesn't make you viscerally feel the fear, or the resource management that I think really does work with survival horror. Right? And then there's anomalies, there's psychic powers and weirdness like that, which isn't particularly helpful either. What's the best way for me to just describe the problem with the system? It would probably be to read some of it out, actually. Right, so defining a conflict. When a conflict arises and it's questionable if a character might succeed, the director calls for a conflict resolution. The player involved, or the director if it's the director's character or event initiating the conflict, comes up with the percentage chance by adding a few elements. Active conflict. This type of conflict is by far the most common used in Maschine Zeit. Anytime a character is trying to accomplish a task, whether or not they're aware of it. This might mean noticing a threat, leaping a ravine, fixing a computer, or any other number of tasks. The player determines a condition for success in a situation and assembles a percentage chance for success by adding one or two universal elements from two different categories if two are used, one applicable personal element, and optionally a single dramatic element. The universal elements used expend pushes. For example, our explorer sees a bit of interesting irradiated metal across a gap in the floor. She tries to reach across. Her player declares that the character's agile body element of 20, her athletic skill, root skill element of 15, and her soldier training, soldier skill set element of 15, play into her character's chance for success. Also, she feels this is important to the character's story, so she adds a dramatic element, 25. This means her chance for success is 75%. That's a lot of wrangling. And then, yes, the final determination isn't particularly helpful either. There's a few examples, spooks and things, which just essentially rub your nose in it that this doesn't do what it says that it wants to do. Some of this is me being negative because I don't like the people involved, but when I got this, it really kind of cemented my disappointment, and they hadn't done many of the horrible things that they've done since either. The cover's good. The interior layout cuts off at the bottom in a way that's fairly amateurish. I mean, sometimes you can't help that, it's whoever does the printing, but other times you can. A lot of the artwork is very thin line art, which doesn't reproduce well in print on demand. So much of the information is hidden in purple prose that it's making me rethink the approach to one of my games that's coming up. And it costs $40, or it cost $40 back in 2008. Now, on the one hand, I can understand charging more for these kind of books because you probably believe that games designers deserve more money than they get and that games are more value than they appear to be, but $40 for 138 pages, not even full letter or A4, with poor production values and bad art, just no. Just no, frankly. If I was producing this, the PDF would probably cost around $12.99, and the hard copy, I wouldn't know. I'd have to go and check. But yeah, it's fairly amateurish. But this is back in 2008, it's fairly early in their career. I suppose you can be forgiving up to a point. But around 2008, 2009, I was producing Cathentical and Blood, which I think is a far superior horror game and easily adaptable to space stuff. I can't with this thing. So style, an extremely generous 3. Substance, there's not a lot there, and what there is there is hidden. So a rather generous 2. So that's a total of 5 out of 10, or 2.5 stars out of 5, and that's being pretty goddamn generous. I think it's probably more like a 2. If you want your space horror, get it somewhere else. Maybe the new Alien game. Zang.
Sure, you could play one of those hoity-toity horror games where the most horrifying thing that happens is someone wearing a corset who really shouldn't. Or you could grind a zombie's face into a belt sander.